So anyway, I just put a short little presentation together about some plans that some planned monitoring we're trying to do in the Central Valley, perhaps Butte Creek, we'll see. Patricia Bratcher's here, and Harvest Vieira, I'll have them stand up later. I kind of got involved with this marijuana thing when Cassandra Lambertin from our Moss Landing Marine Lab called me and said, should we put together a training for our swamp crews, in case they get, involved with, marijuana. We do the random sample throughout California, and there's a chance there might be a marijuana grow there. What do you do? She suggested we do a training, and I thought it was a great idea. So I got the name of a warden, and I called him, who's been working on this, to ask him if he would participate in doing this training. And it was just amazing, the emotion that came from him on this issue. This is the #1 water quality problem in Northern California, period. And just going on and on, again, everyone's saying, they don't care about the marijuana itself, but just the fact. And I didn't know, Jan Reinerneck right here, I introduced yesterday, she's been on some of these grows after, they busted them and stuff. And so we've heard about the danger, and, even personal danger, being dropped into one of these sites and finding all this stuff. So I heard all this, potential problems. And then that was in 2011. And then when I was involved with the Garcia River causal analysis work with Jonathan Warmerdam, again, trying to come up with stressors in that watershed, and we're all thinking about timber, historic, effects, present effects, and this and that. And Jonathan says, marijuana. It's marijuana. Marijuana is a problem. In fact, he went on and on. So I was getting it not just from the people that are personally, affected by it when they go to bust one of these sites or help the local sheriffs, one of our fish and game wardens or environmental scientists, but also the North Coast Board, regional board, very, respectable people that know what's going on. You don't think about them being that emotional, but it is kind of an emotional thing. So that stopped my training because, you can't get emotion involved. And as a scientist, I consider myself, at least I think that way. I wonder, what is the concerns? And then Tricia here she's been working on this for a long time too, and has some sources, knew of some sources of funding. So she called a bunch of people, and I happened to be on one of the calls, and so I just tried to get involved. Also, Harvest Vieira, you'll meet her later. She wanted to do some work last year, so she did, for her graduate work, we did a little pilot, and I went up and trained her on bioassessment techniques, because I'm thinking bioassessment might be one of the tools that we can use for this. So I got involved. Trish was, I think we had a delay on getting, some funding for a while, but then it came up again, and she's been working really hard on getting some of this funding. So it was just this summer, about July, August, that put the final touches on this proposal. So I just want to go over this proposal of work that we might do to deal with this. Again, I stole one of these pictures. You can see in there watersheds and all the different, that's my point. Yeah. Sorry, past presenters who didn't have this little tool. But, again, you can see all these effects of marijuana. The grows, of course, Jen did a better job than I did. But, these greenhouse all over the place, that's what those dots are. And then actual illegal. In fact, the difference between 215, whatever type legal operations, because I guess they have cancer or something, and the illegal people that, might even be coming from other countries to grow this, marijuana. So, the big question in my mind, is marijuana cultivation a significant water quality problem, like people say? Getting emotional, getting some ideas that it might be, but is it truly? Is it more than present timber harvest practices or historic effects of timber harvest? of recreation and all these other things. So trying to think of a way to try to truly answer that question in a watershed approach. So I'm just going to outline the grant that we put together. Trish pushed through. She's the primary on it. And so some of the questions, the steps, we kind of organized it into a few steps. So the first step is to develop the information and tools needed to define the potential stressors caused by marijuana production using the EPA causal analysis or another comparable procedure. It doesn't, in fact, you'll see later on in the slide that we're going about it a little twisted, but just to try to use a non-biased, or a systematic way to try to address all the potential concerns in a watershed, including marijuana. Ultimately, the study plan, including this non-biased analysis, will compare the threats of marijuana cultivation relative to historic and present land use activities. So trying to do an entire watershed type approach using marijuana as one of the land uses. This work is fully funded, this part of it, and it's already got started. We've had some meetings. I went over to the coast and worked with Scott Bauer and Jen and Adam, and we talked about some potential ways. It's not going to be an easy, probabilistic is hard. This is going to be a targeted design, but still, getting within proximity above and below, typical above and below, but again, you're not going to hire students and say, well, go talk to the nice pot growers and see if you can study their problem. So it's not going to be easy, and I'm not saying that we've got it all figured out, but we're trying to do it and also doing it in a non-biased way. So we took that first step and broke it up into these tasks, to assemble a monitoring committee of people interested in the goals. That's another thing. It's happening so fast. People have been working on it for a while. There's some pieces of data here and there, but we want to try to centralize that data so that we can, and interested people. Again, that's why I asked if we can, give this presentation to this group, because that's the idea of this CABW meeting, is to try to get some input and some suggestions. So I want to put together this monitoring committee of people to help us along the way. Compile all this information, available information on the impacts of marijuana to date, and put it into, or make it available to the monitoring committee, perhaps through a on-site or a website type application. We still have to, work on the best way to do that. A list of the committee members, their roles, meeting, and all this stuff will be the product. So we're going to try to get, and perhaps an online method of accessing the information. So all this stuff we want to work through, and again, hopefully get input from this monitoring committee so we can, again, do this the right way. And I really, again, like I said, this is the audience that I like to address. If anyone has an interest, one, in maybe being on the monitoring committee to kind of help us through this, or two, just have an interest and want to be on the list of people that get information from the work we're going to be doing in the future. I appreciate it. If you give me an email, let us know, come and talk to us afterwards or something like this. I appreciate it. The third task is to select a watershed that will be used to monitor the effects of marijuana cultivation. Part of this grant, it comes from, I didn't go through the acronyms on that first slide, but it's associated with the Central Valley and fisheries enhancement. So the work will have to be done in the Central Valley, one of the tributaries of the Central Valley. So that is the universe we're going to be within, but we have to select a watershed or maybe a couple watersheds. Again, we're still open. Used to monitor the effects of marijuana with assistance from law enforcement, GIS staff, and develop a marijuana cultivation site overlay map. You'll see some of the stuff that Adam has done next, and we're going to do the same thing. There is a lot of work that's already been done. There's a lot of wardens that in the Central Valley, Region 2, that have plotted where some of this intensive marijuana cultivation is going on, so we're going to use their information. So, like, for example, this is one of Adam's slides, but we will have something like this, for the Central Valley area. And so we definitely want to pick a watershed or watersheds that has some intensive cultivation. But in addition to that, there's other criteria. Again, we want to pick one that has anadromous fish, special status, special habitats, where we have good ownership, perhaps cooperative timber land operator, agriculture, whatever. We want people to obviously want to get, buy into this. And there might even be some other aspects. So not just a watershed that has a lot of marijuana cultivation going on, but also has anadromous fish concerns. And then again, construct these detailed maps of the marijuana cultivation, similar to what those guys are doing. Hopefully we're going to, work and try to, the work they're going to be doing in the North Coast, the work we're going to be doing for monitoring the effects of marijuana cultivation will be similar, trying to coordinate all that work. But in addition, to that, we also want to know the other land use practices. So we want to find a watershed. Once we find the watershed, find the marijuana, and we will have sites on the marijuana streams, of course, but also those that are draining other type of land uses in the area. So trying to look at all land uses to answer that question. And I mentioned, to compile this into a causal analysis type comparison. So the funded part of this grant will address the first two questions of causal analysis. Now, Cindy Lynn did a great job on explaining a causal analysis and had some diagrams. This is just a general diagram, but we wanted to find the case, list the candidate causes. It's sort of like a reverse thing in that after that, in fact, I think it's pretty cool because we'll know the potential stressors and then design the monitoring to try to fit within that. Normally, a causal analysis is you get a impaired site or a site that has a problem, and then you're trying to pick through it. And I remember Andy Wren going through all the data and the team, for the Garcia. It was sort of like a practice or an example, but you're trying to make the data fit. Well, hopefully in this case we can try to make sure the sites are places that we can use where we can have comparator sites. And reference, of course, is already established through the PSA program, so that's really good. So that's the other sites of actually going through the diagnostics, and eventually, even in the bottom, that's another fantasy. Maybe down the road, if they legalize it, we can try to come up with some potential remedies for best management practices. So anyway, task 7 is describe the sampling procedures. So it's going to fit towards swamp, of course. We're going to try, because the tens of millions of dollars worth of data that we have there for the reference sites, potential comparator sites, and again, the way you do a causal analysis, you need that kind of stuff. So we're going to obviously try to stick with the swamp protocols for doing this monitoring. So those are going to be established. We're going to try to get those procedures for doing this ambient monitoring of a watershed. But I'm going to and again, the reason is we all know that the infrastructure's there. So why not take advantage of it? And also, Jen was mentioning, you saw this stuff, the potential dewatering, the nutrients, even the terrestrial miticides and pesticides. If you think about it, most of their effects is not going to be when you go bust the people or you shut down in the fall. It'll happen when the cumulative effects in the spring. So it's a typical, I think, bioassessment type program to answer that question. Is it, causing more water quality than a comparator site that's draining forest or agricultural land? So I think the bioassessment would be a good first attempt to doing it. And again, having the CSCI is really going to help us because, again, we have more comparator and reference sites that we can use. And look, it's, again, people have talked about the CSCI. I stole this from Rafi's presentation last year. But again, it gives you things like missing taxa and the different metrics so that we can try to tease out some of the problems that are occurring with the bioluminescent signal, and then later on go in and do the more intensive chemical analysis. So that's basically what we have funded to do for right now. There's other steps that we put in the proposal that aren't funded yet, but we're hoping that maybe down the road there would be, like conducting monitoring activity within a selected watershed at a selected marijuana field, trying to get more to that diagnostic, working with law enforcement to get into a field and try to find out some protocols, put together protocols of what you do after the bust. We're going to finalize sampling protocols again for answering the question, is it a problem, and then some protocols for when you're on the site, and maybe there'll even be a system or funding to fix the site, and then afterwards monitor if that fix was good or not. And then produce a report to communicate the effects of marijuana cultivation on the biotic integrity of anadromous fish, and identify and prioritize areas to protect and restore and develop and process data that can be used to quantify those effects. So these are long-term goals. First, we want to answer the question, is there a problem within a selected watershed? And then try to tease out what part of marijuana production is producing that, and who knows, in the fantasy world, trying to come up with best management practices. It's hard to see, this is the timeline from the scheduled work, October through June 2014, and the different tasks that I just mentioned. And we also think we might have enough funding to actually do the work, so we're going to put everything together, the structure, the protocols, and then I put in a 4-month opportunity here to do recon of the area and try to pick out some sites so that maybe next spring we can get a sampling event in at this whatever selected watershed we pick, knowing that it might take a couple, 2-3 years to get there. It's not going to be, we're not going to send people into peril or into into harm's way, and so we really need to figure that thing out to do it safe and sane, but try to get as close to some of these marijuana production plots as we can. So again, there's Tricia there. And Harvest, where's Harvest? There she is. So I didn't even ask them, but I don't think they'd mind. I put up their emails, and of course, in fact, I'm in here too. Where am I? I'm over her shoulder, right there. But they're the primaries, and I always, sit in the back anyway, or well, sort of. But you can either email me, talk to them. If you want to be on the monitoring panel to try to get this organized and then stay in touch with what we're going to be doing. And I'm sure there's going to be many other programs. In fact, next you're going to hear from Adam, who's going to talk about what they're going to be doing to address sort of the same question on Northern California streams and some of the work that they've already done and that we're going to be, of course, piggybacking on too. Is that your first slide right there? Ah, there we go. Yes?
And we have funding to cover travel.
And we have funding to cover travel. And expenses.
Well, travel expenses.
Travel expenses. We're going to China, like Cindy Lynn. I don't even get paid to go to Panama. I got to at least get paid to go somewhere. Okay, yeah, no, we have, and we have the funding for the travel. We have the funding for the scientific, some scientific aids, and a little bit of harvest this time. Any immediate questions? Tom? Wait a minute. I'm sorry. You don't exist until you have a microphone.
Do you have money for algae as well as BMIs?
Not in the first, again, we had some limited on funds in the beginning. This is getting started, but most certainly algae will be in there for the second go round and trying to pick up. We'll see what we can pick up with the invertebrates. And then I see this getting much more complicated as far as the diagnostic part, and then go in and collect other data. That's what I kind of want to do is, when you follow the causal analysis, just get the signal, answer the first question, do we have some hits on some of these sites? And then we'll go in and diagnose those particular sites, and algae will definitely come in on it, but not as an ambient tool. We had to limit our money, so we stuck with in fact, we haven't even answered if we're going to be doing electroshocking or looking at the fish in a site. That's another thing that we want to kind of bounce off the, in fact, that brings a good point, actually, with the algae. So let's say we get this monitoring group together, and algae becomes, a very important thing. We would love to get other contributors. This is an interest of a lot of people mentioned how, they're concerned with this. I did a training down for the EPA Region 9 tribal conference, and I had people come up to me from the tribes saying that they're concerned on their land. So if we can get some contributors and maybe put algae into the first year, which, again, the first sampling would be April, May, June of 2014, so we'll see.